What's the most genius 4D chess strategic move you've ever seen someone execute at work or in life? I was chosen as the representative of my senior class in a Scrabble tournament. I was against this junior girl, who was the best player in the whole school. Now, I'm not exactly a pathetic player, but this girl was miles ahead in terms of Scrabble skills. It was a best out of 3 type of game, and I have already won the first round simply due to sheer luck. Halfway through the second game, however, I figured that I won't be able to win the round as my score isn't even half of hers. So in order to invalidate the round, I purposely placed a wrong word in the board. I was graduating salutatorian of the whole senior class, so she really didn't think I'll get a word wrong, and let the whole game finished. Obviously, she won by a large margin. Lo and behold, one of the teachers came to check the game's progress and he noted the non-existent word point as per rules of the game, and the girl's insistence that she can't accept the win given the situation. We redid the whole second round. The next second round ended in a tie, and by technicality, I actually won the whole tournament. This was probably the first strategic, albeit very manipulative, thing I have done in my life. Maybe not totally genius, but close point. I had a colleague who worked at a very large company who was on temporary promotion to quite a senior position. It was a position that he knew a number of other people in the company were interested in applying for, many of whom were far more qualified than him. The day eventually came when the management decided to fill the post permanently and to start the process by looking for recruits from within the company. He now faced the very real possibility that the well-paid job he'd been doing for about a year might be taken from him and handed to someone from another department. To get the recruitment process underway, the local management asked him to write the ad for the job, which would then appear in the internal job vacancies listings on the company intranet. My colleague saw his opportunity and seized it with both hands. Firstly, he changed the job title in a way that could be justified, but made the vacancy unrecognizable to anyone skimming through the listings who were specifically looking for it. Secondly, he started the ad by focusing on some of the more obscure aspects of the job, making it sound almost like an entirely different kind of role. He only got to the core parts of the job that people might recognize. After about 3 paragraphs, it worked brilliantly. No one else applied for the job because it was impossible to identify it from a quick read of the title and opening paragraphs. My colleague was duly appointed to it after a successful interview. He should explain that what made this such a neat trick was that the ad was for a specialist job in a company that had quite a few specialists in that field, but was mostly full of generalists. My colleague changed the title to something that sounded very generalist and also wrote the first 3 paragraphs in a generalist way, only switching to the specialist information in paragraph 4. Why I think it worked so well was because the generalists who might have been drawn to the job by its title and opening few paragraphs then gave up when they realized it required specialist skills that they lacked. Meanwhile, the specialists only saw the generalist title and immediately moved on to the next ad, not realizing that it could well have been the perfect job for them. I used to work as a sub-teacher and was having a class of 4th graders. Crafty, manipulative little fakers, let me tell you. One kid absolutely had to sit in the front of the classroom. The reason for this is that he essentially controlled the other kids by giving them looks. If he was in the front, you at least had a tell, because he turned around for a second or two, gave a look, and some kid chucked his math book across the classroom. Also, after having a few classes with these kids, one kid stayed in the classroom during the break and I asked her what was wrong. Apparently 2 boys in the class was mean to her and calling her names, so I told her I'd tell their original teacher and or the principal. I was only a sub after all and had no place disciplining kids. As I talked to one of the teachers about it, I found out that the problem isn't the boys, it's 2 other girls in the class. See, these 2 girls would tell the boys to go bully this girl and be mean to her, not because they didn't like the girl, but because they wanted the boys to get told off and disciplined for whatever reason. The bullied girl was just a tool in their eyes. If I ever need a general to confuse and misdirect my enemies in conflict, I'd recruit a 9-year-old girl. Haha, this reminds me of the They Are Billions game Cheese Strategy. It's a video game where you harvest resources Create buildings, build defenses, make units, all to defend yourself from repeated waves of zombies from all sides. As the days go on, the waves get stronger and larger. Eventually near day 100 there is a huge wave with literally 15,000 plus zombies. Gamma was rough starting out, since I could get to the last wave, but not really beat it. Then I discovered that as the final wave approached you could literally self-destruct pretty much every building you wanted to except your command center. Self-destructing buildings gave back 50% of the resources it took to make it, giving you large sums of gold, ironwood etc. point to construct even more defenses with. But this also had the additional downside of reducing your resource production. If you for example blow up a farm or a power plant, with no power plants, you'll soon have no power. With no farms you'd have no food and starve, after all. But the funny part is that it takes a bit of time to run down your last bits of resources. And that it didn't matter if your energy was in the negative or your food production was in the negative, because by the time any of that would truly matter, you would have either defeated the final wave or been defeated by the final wave. It looks dumb from the outside, because even though you when you're left with a society that has no power for their buildings, an economy in shambles, gold income in negative, can't pay production or unit upkeep, where everybody is starving and will soon die. But the game immediately ends when you win, so it ends up being fine. LOL equals SO yeah. Same strat kind of. Cannibalizing your own assets at the end of the game such that you have a strange and weird and hollow victory, but still technically a victory nonetheless. In the real world such a tactic looks retarded, since you lose everything to achieve it, but in a game a win is a win. In other news, this strategy became the meta, and you are expected to do this, especially if you want to beat the higher difficulties. That's right, final wave, you better start blowing up all your buildings for refunds on resources or you probably won't win, haha. This reminds me of a game we played in high school that was designed to show us the emotional, physical and monetary cost of war versus peace. It was a theology class taught by kind of a hippie, but the game was super cool and pretty intricate for what amounted to a simple lesson. Sorry about the length, and some of it may be a bit hazy, since this was like 25 years ago, but here goes. Essentially each student, maybe 25 students total, was their own sovereign nation, and we started with a standing army and a certain amount of credits to represent our economy. We would take turns, and in the first round we had the option to attack another student, form an alliance with another student, or do nothing. The consequences weren't given ahead of time, so most kids just did nothing, and we were each awarded an additional credit. The teacher kept track of each student/nation's alliances, defenses and economy. Eventually one kid decides to attack his buddy, because it was obviously only a matter of time. They each had the same size army, but the attacker lost 2 credits versus the defender's 1 credit, something like that. The reason was that it costs more to attack than to defend. Reasonable. Everything escalates with each round. Navies are introduced, global alliances, nuclear weapons and disarmament, etc. It really got pretty intense, and it kind of became the talk of the school, because the teacher does this with all his classes, and it goes on for like 3 or 4 days until there is some sort of global agreement in place to show us how great peace is. By like the 3rd day everyone was like, oh, we figured it out, you have to have the whole class agree to disarm everything. 2 of my friends were in this class with me, and we were all basically like, fuck that mess, we are destroying the rest of our class. So we sat through 3 days of this, and notices a few loopholes in the rules that could be exploited. I don't recall exactly what rules were, but forming an alliance and disarming weapons was rewarded more than it should have, based on the size of the alliance. We're on day 4 now, and the class is divided into 5 factions. One is about 15 kids and another is about 8, and then their army, and my 2 friends who represent 3 rogue nations. So in what would normally be approaching the endgame, the 2 large alliances merge and basically threaten to attack us if we don't join them. Kind of a dick move in my opinion, but what none of them realized is that according to the rules we were awarded the same benefits for forming an alliance that they were, except we got 3 turns to their 1 if we were separated. So 2 of us would take a turn and stock up on whatever weapons we could, then the 3rd rogue nation would offer to form an alliance, which we would of course accept. Then the large group would attack us, but because we were pretty robust defensively from laying low, it would cost them more. to attack us than for us to defend. After that we would break up our alliance, buy more weapons independently, then form another alliance. This went on for an entire class until our 3-nation rogue alliance was significantly more powerful than the larger alliance. Class ended on day 4 with a little spiel from the teacher about how this wasn't really going as planned, and that it would be over tomorrow, Friday, whether or not we made peace. Oh, it's going to end tomorrow. So our 4D gambit became pretty obvious, but it was already too late for the larger alliance. They had begun to disarm their weapons because they were being rewarded economically, and we had more than enough to obliterate them the following day. I was concerned that the large group would attempt a similar strategy by breaking up and taking advantage of the extra turns it afforded them, which is exactly what they did. So each of us in the 3 nations recruited a member of the larger alliance to defect to us. What knew what they had planned, and we were going to destroy them if they attempted to copy our strategy. So they predictably break up so that they can each make a move on their own, then reunite at the end. Except this is when our defectors come in. They declined the invite to reform the alliance, and now we have 6 heavily armed rogue nations all set to have a turn at the newly formed 19-nation alliance with our abundant economy, but very little in the way of defensive capability. It was perfect. I'm going to attack, lose the attack, but it cost them. Now I'm going to attack, etc. They had no defenses left after the 5th wave and their economy was destroyed. My friend slowly draws up the biggest grin I've ever seen, and she just quietly says, finish them. At this point it was very obvious that we were a lost class. Clearly this was not the intended outcome, and the teacher made it very clear. He said something along the lines of, I've been tweaking this exercise for 15 years over about 5 classes a year, and never has devolved into what I just saw. Congratulations, you're all dead, because you dropped enough bombs to cause nuclear winter, and whoever wasn't killed in the blasts has either starved or died from exposure. This same girl pipes up and goes, so they all died first from the blasts, right? Do we get the win? Recently, in the Counter-Strike scene, an American player called FNS made some moves that were likely not intended to cause the results that he got, but in hindsight it appears like he was a strategic mastermind. FNS was on a low-level team called Counter-Logic Gaming, who never competed for top spots and were content to sit around and scoop up mediocre placements in tournaments while raking in sponsor money. The Brazilian scene was either the best or second best in the entire game, but it was debatable. One of the players in the second best Brazilian team was KNG. FNS tweeted that his own team lost to KNG's team despite KNG's team being hungover from partying too hard. KNG didn't like that. KNG threatened to kill FNS and reportedly roamed the hotel where they both were staying looking for him. This made KNG's team owner nervous, and as a result he benched KNG. KNG had 2 friends on his team, Hen1 and Lucas, who both stepped down from active play when KNG was benched. This left the remaining 2 people on the second best Brazilian team without teammates, as it is not normal to have substitute players signed on the roster. The 4th player on that team, Bolts, was then sold to the best team in Brazil, SK Gaming, who had been looking to replace one of their players for stylistic reasons. This caused a long period of underperformance from them. Meanwhile, the best NA team won a major, the biggest competition in CS, in a massive overperformance throughout the entire tournament. This caused the star player from that NA team to transfer, for some reason, to SK Gaming, which required that the best Brazilian team switch languages, which caused an even bigger slump that they still have not recovered from. Enter FNS. He was then picked up by the best NA team, who bought out his contract with CLG. Remember that this entire situation was caused by a single tweet from FNS. 400 IQ plays from FNS. It gets deeper, though. The French scene, historically one of the most dominant, was doing alright. They had one team that competed at the highest level, and occasionally won big events. With FNS moving to Cloud9, and then subsequently being released from the roster without a contract, allowing him to seek team opportunities wherever he wants. A talent vacuum was created in the NA scene, but all of the other good players were contracted to Team Liquid. This meant that NBK, from the French scene, a highly experienced and smart player, left the only good French team, and is looking to be bought up by Cloud9. This meant that G2, the best French team, had an opportunity to try out an extremely risky roster change where they brought in an older player, as well as reuniting the two best players in France, Sharks and Kenny S. This move may or may not pay off, but it is certainly less definite than it would have been if nothing had changed. The upshot of it is that FNS destroyed the Brazilian scene, taking it from a period where they were easily the best team in the world to where it is now, with one semi-competitive team. After this, he managed to join the best NA team and get good experience and a lot of money before leaving with the ability to do whatever he wanted. He's a free agent. In the meantime, he potentially ruined the strong French scene too, and, for the time being, took the best NA team out of contention until they sign someone to play for them. This means that whatever FNS chooses to do will have a higher chance of winning due to a lower competition level overall. One tweet. My girlfriend lives in Australia and I live in the US. We don't get to spend much time together because of the distance obviously, and because of the time difference and our schedules we get a limited, but fairly consistent, amount of time we can spend together online, which we normally spend Skyping while playing games. Last summer she was coming to spend about 5 weeks with me in the US and we were both insanely excited. About a week before, my family was getting together for an early dinner, which wasn't very common as we all live on our own. My father picked me up to take me to the restaurant and I walked in the door and saw her sitting with my mom and sister. I was absolutely speechless and couldn't even make a coherent thought. She had planned it out with my mom months in advance and I had no idea. She sent me pictures and only messaged me at certain times so that I wouldn't catch on while she was taking the 30-hour trip over here. I cannot explain the happiness I felt and the shock I was in. In about 4 months I'm moving to Australia to live with her and I've never been happier in my entire life. Edit. 30-hour flight to 30-hour trip. Didn't think it'd be taken so literal. My grandfather pulled this move in the 1960s. Not sure it's possible or even legal anymore, but it was back when business owners had personal relationships with their bankers. Gramps had commercial properties where he rented out office space to businesses. One of his tenants was failing and about to close shop and owed him a bunch of rent to the tune of thousands of dollars. They cut him a check for the rent owed, but asked him to wait a week to deposit/cash it. Gramps knew the company wouldn't be around in a week and he'd never see his money if he waited. He took the check to the bank. They both used same bank and tried to cash it. Sure enough, they didn't have enough to cover the check and the teller told him she couldn't cash it because of insufficient funds. Gramps asked how much they were short and the teller told him about $200. So Gramps took $200 out of his wallet, had her deposit it into their account, and then cashed his check for the thousands they owed him. The next day the owners called him furious and in disbelief that he got his check cashed and cleaned them out at the same time. Instead of lasting another week, they were out of business that day, but Gramps got his money. I know this guy that was stuck in a job for a couple years. He figured he technically couldn't be fired and had an unlimited amount of paid medical leave, so he did his job well and got a couple promotions which raised his salary significantly. Eventually he became the bro that was chill and on good terms with his superiors and everyone. As soon as his new superior and sub got trained by him, he would turn up for work 2 out of 5 days and then would disappear for weeks at a time, only coming back once or twice a month for funses. He did this until his term was up, and thinking back on it, he amassed almost a year's worth of medical leave which was fully paid for by the company's insurance. Dude was literally paid to do nothing. One day we met at a bar and had casual banter over which he explained how he managed to pull it off. I swear to God it was the most meticulously planned stunt I've ever heard. He basically went full force for the promotions and increased salary, at the same time building rapport with his peers and gaining their trust before going rogue. Even after going rogue he would pop into work occasionally to ease the workload upon request during audits, and his superiors eventually closed an eye and let him do whatever the heck he wants because he ultimately had them all by the balls. Dude and his superiors were so tight, even after becoming a massive liability they'd still go out of their way to cover his ass. He definitely knew what he was doing as his recommendation letters were nothing but praise, even though he didn't do jack shit. Massive respect for this lad. He certainly knows how to manipulate people to his advantage, and has shook up the very definition of 9 to 5 for me. My 46-year-old alcoholic sociopathic ex-husband. It's a long story. I'll try to summarize. In court during our divorce, he argued that he's gay. He's always been gay, that everyone knew he was gay, including me, and that I forced him to marry me after getting pregnant with some gay sex. I don't know, I'm a woman, because I was desperate to get married. The judge bought that. Probably it was more the fact that his brother is also a judge, but whatever. The custody battle later. I pay him $400 a month in child support, which I'm proud to do, because I take care of my child, even though we share joint custody and she's with me 75% of the time. Whatever, it gives him a buffer to actually feed her. After he buys beer and cigarettes and weed. He gets a DUI. Causes a media ruckus. Gets fired. Then gets fired 6 more times in 2 years, once by his own brother, and evicted twice, once by the same brother. My daughter lives with me full time, because he can't be home at night, waits tables. For 2 years, I still pay him child support, because he won't be reasonable, and I don't have the money for an attorney. Moves into his grandfather's house, while his grandfather is in assisted living. Gets part-time internship from a financial planner / family friend. Makes $250 a week for 20 hours a week. Claims to work full time. Now can't go back to court because his income is too small. Grandfather passes away. Ex remains in the 3 British Rail house, angry he did not inherit. Claims family stole it from him. I ask to amend child support. He decides to assert his right to more time with daughter, even though I had to beg him to spend time with her for 2 years. Family members who jointly own the house ask him for $300 a month in rent. He refuses. Since he lived there rent-free for a year, is now legal tenant. They have to go through formal eviction proceedings. Takes them another year of wrangling before they finally give up on getting him to pay what he owes, and they decide to sell the house. When they tell him they are going to evict him, he tries to get back together with me. When that fails, because I know his character, he tries to move in with me, arguing it's better for our daughter if we do. I refuse. He threatens to sue me. I laugh. A month before they officially put the house up for sale, he starts dating a woman who has only been divorced for 2 months. 2 weeks after he starts dating her, his brother serves him with eviction papers. 3 weeks after he starts dating her, they're engaged. 2 weeks after that, they're married. She's his soulmate, the love of his life. Daughter is, understandably, furious and upset. New wife is, his 48-year-old divorce attorney, who argued in court that he's gay, has always been gay, and everyone knows he's gay, and that I chose to marry him because I was desperate to get married. They've been married 2 weeks. They are talking about buying a house and having another baby soon. Because of their ages, here's the 4D chess. She can't say she didn't know he was gay when they married. She did not know about the eviction notice. He claimed he owned the house. She did not know he was only employed part-time. He claimed he works full-time. When they inevitably divorce, he can claim again that the marriage was a fraud the whole time, that she was newly divorced and desperate to get remarried. He'll get everything, plus alimony and child support, because she was the one who made the argument in court in the first place. Edit. Forgot to mention that the new wife's mother is in her 80s and in a wheelchair, and the wife is her only child. She's set to inherit. And, in our state, all assets gained during the marriage are community property. Edit 2. Also forgot to mention that he is 5 years in arrears for shared expenses. Also not certain I'm spelling arrears correctly, lol. Edit 3. The prediction I made his brother, because ex-husband, is now a financial planner. He's not. He works for a financial planner. He is only certified to sell insurance and annuities, but can't balance his own checkbook. He will soon propose to new wife that he move into her office and handle her books. Will begin siphoning money, ruining her financially, and hamstringing her ability to hire co-counsel to represent her in the divorce, thus cementing his 4D chess move. Not sure if I'm doing this right on my phone, so I hope this posts correctly. I did think about warning her, but it happened so fast. The abuser's MO is love bomb them and then lock them down before they can escape, and I know he has her convinced that I'm dangerously mentally ill and still in love with him. He is always careful to lay the right groundwork, so she is looking for confirmation of her knowledge of who I am. In addition to her incorrect preconceived notion that I'm an abusive crazy lady, I figured that if his family and hers couldn't talk some sense into them, and they tried, the dreaded ex-wife certainly can't. I'm always polite and never unkind. She is now my child's stepmother, and there is no point in alienating her. But he has already started isolating her, telling me and his mother that I know of that she is in therapy for depression and struggles with money. She's not a very good attorney, I guess, if she has to engage in perjury. My only concern is my child. My ex-husband's relationships are not my business unless they impact my daughter. So far, she has not been unkind, but she lost her teenage daughter in a car accident about 15 years ago, so I imagine that she will continue to be nice to my daughter. But they have both taken to smoking in the house around her, and they are both heavy drinkers. I know that people will advise me to go to the police or DFCS about the drinking. I have. He is a judge's brother. The police once escorted him home after they pulled him over for DUI. And my daughter once called me to his house because he fell down a lot and then went to sleep, so I called an ambulance. He regained consciousness before they arrived, but they saw that he was wasted, so they called the cops. They told me that, at 11 years old, my daughter was old enough to take care of herself and refused to let me take her home just for the night. It was his week with her. I live in a smallish town, mainly supported by a military base. I make around $40,000, but $5,000 goes to my ex, and $5,000 covers mine and my daughter's insurance policies. Again, I pay for everything, and I'm proud to do so. My 9-year-old car needs repairs. Our justice system requires a great deal of money to gain access to it. I have to work within the parameters I have, so please reserve your judgment. I'm open to suggestions, however. Thank you. Some number of years ago I was an independent commodities trader in a trading pit. Think trading places. But I also traded lots of stuff that weren't in that specific pit. I was very open about what I was trading and why. Everyone was very aware that I was making good money on these strategies. A number of people wanted to go along with me. So I opened a friends and family type account as is allowed and told the group of 20 of my competitors that they were all welcome to join me if they wanted. About half of them did. This required their going through lots of paperwork and depositing their money into these accounts that I had full authority over. A new dynamic emerged soon after. We were all in this together, or at least half of us were. Everybody knew who was in and who wasn't. Here's the thing. In the pit we are all competitors. We actively try to tear each other's throats out on a daily basis. But who is going to fuck with me now? Surely not the guys that have me managing their money, which was half of them. And the other half, would they screw with me knowing that half the pit would have my back in almost any situation? It was accidental on my part. But no one would fuck with me from that point forward. All of this was 100% legal, by the way. I had a boss who was, I believe, mentally ill. She would just not show up for days on end. When we raised the concern with her boss, after she blew through a bunch of important meetings, he told us that he was aware of her scheduling needs and we didn't need to be concerned. Boss comes in and tells us that she has a very serious but unnamed disease that requires her to take a bunch of time, noting that most days she cannot physically get out of bed, let alone come into work. Problem was that, at her insistence, we were all Facebook friends with her, as Facebook was her preferred method for contacting us out of the office. So while she was too sick to get out of bed, we couldn't help but notice that she was posting photos, videos, live streams of herself out and about and having the time of her life. So we gathered the screenshots and submit them to our company's anonymous tip line, basically saying she was defrauding the company disability and disability accommodation program. Because this involved an actual insurance program, disability, they sent it to our company's special investigation unit, and they put her under surveillance. During surveillance they learned she was absolutely full of shit with regards to her insurance claim. She was faking her boss, the one who was covering for her. She was faking the doctor who was writing her out of work. Incidentally, his disciplinary action was how we found out as much. We did since it was public record. She got fired. He got fired. Doctor got suspended for a year, but got 6 months of his suspension suspended, provided he complete an ethics course on, I guess, not faking patients and helping them commit fraud. We got a new boss's boss who promoted me shortly after arriving. Checkmate, beaches. Well, I doubt it would be considered a 4D chess move, but that's still something that baffled me. I used to work in a middle school as a watcher surveillant. My job was to look after the kids during recess, when a teacher was absent, during lunchtime, and to make sure they leave on time. In France, you can sometimes go out at 2 p.m. or at 5 p.m. and every hour in between. So we were supposed to check their schedule and make sure they wouldn't leave while still having classes to attend. We had this one kid, M, who was a total mess. Kid was kinda faked up and ended up being fired after throwing someone else's bag filled with heavy sheet from the 3rd floor. Fortunately, he didn't hit anyone. The kid would never do what you told him. Get in line to eat, and he would run away to play. M, you still have your math lesson, go back to class. And he would run away from school. Repeat. So we decided to use the most basic reverse psychology we could think of. Kid is trying to leave school, but he still has 2 hours of class. Okay M, you can leave. It's not like I will run after you. Kid would go back to class. I don't want you to go eat. You'll make a mess of the lunchroom. Would make him get in line. I think we spent the last month making him do exactly as we wished. This way. I don't usually have anything negative to say about kids, but this one was really strange. My father-in-law had a legitimate anxiety problem with an open-ended medical certificate and about 2 years sick leave up his sleeve. Approaching retirement, the company didn't want to give him a redundancy package, even though they were downsizing and handing out packages left and right. Oh, this is causing me stress. I'm leaving early. Come in next day. Oh, this issue is causing me stress. I'll see you on Tuesday. Come in on Tuesday. No, something's not right. I need another 3 days off. Come in Monday. I feel great. Give me all the projects. I can do this. I'm powering through the work. No wait, no I'm not. See you next Tuesday. They had to hire someone to do his job. How long until you retire? 2 years. How much sick leave do you have? 2 years. How much time off does this certificate give you? 2 years. And I don't know about you, but this conversation is causing me stress. Can we continue it next week? Next week they raise the topic of the possibility of a redundancy package. Oh, that's great, but I'll need another week to de-stress before we can talk about it. How does Wednesday sound? He got the package and it only took 4 months. So my dad is in a management in a big company. At some point he gets a new hire up. Okay, it happens this new guy is looking to cut cost and come to my dad saying his working post won't exist in 2/3 months. He then proposed to my dad a new post, far less paid, with practically the same responsibilities, or a payment, and going out of the company. My dad worked there for nearly 3 decades, so the guy is sure that my dad will accept it. My dad accept the money to get out. Sending this new dude in a panic. He tried to convince my father to stay. He didn't knew how to handle my father job without him. Funny things is, this guy didn't warn anyone in this company that he did this to my dad. And when you attack a guy who started at the bottom of the company and became a somewhat high manager, not top, but decently high, that is very liked. You prepare for this. My dad just told this guy superior he was going to accept the money. The superior, not knowing about that, asked my dad what was happening. My dad said nothing and sent him to new dude. New dude got shit on and quit a few weeks after my dad got his job, a raise, a week more of vacation per year, going up to 7 weeks, since he already had one more than the legal, and his office is now in a city. Wanted to live all for a long time. Thank you new dude, you being an asshole helped my dad greatly. I'll still punch you if I ever see you. We are talking about a game/server that had player-made factions, so I'll call the factions with letters. So I was on this clan, we'll call it A. It was pretty strong. Nothing major of course, but we did have some alliances with a clan way stronger than us. We'll call it B, because our leader was the brother of one of their best players now, in this game. Before you join a clan they usually ask you to bring in some riches, both to support the clan and demonstrate you can be useful in some way. Of course the bigger the clan the more expensive things get, so one day a player decided to join, and even brought us more riches than what we asked for, which I found suspicious, but more on that later. So time goes by, and I receive a message from a guy that mentioned breaking the alliance between clan A and B and some other information. It clearly wasn't meant for me, but I received it because my username, as here, started with L, and if you just put those in and let the game fill in the name it'll go by alphabetical order. So I thought it was suspicious. I didn't even know the guy, but then I started wondering who was that message for? Why did he want to break our alliance? Who was this guy? So I check, and turns out the guy who messaged me is in clan B, but I figured he wasn't messaging someone from the same clan, because nobody from there had a name starting with L. I check the player list to see who else could he have messaged. There were a couple of options, but most of them were irrelevant. One stuck out though, because there was this guy with the name starting with L who was in clan C. Clan C was the top dog of the server basically. They had all the good stuff and even knowing hints of the position of their base was basically impossible. I asked the brother of my leader about the guy who messaged me in clan B and turns out he too paid more than he needed to pay to enter the clan. So things get suspicious, and I decide to confront the guy in clan B about it, threatening to show everyone the chat message if he didn't tell me what was going on. Motherfucker in clan A was the same guy in clan B, but he wanted to get in clan C. Well, kind of like everyone. The problem is that their entry fees are astronomically high, and they only take in people they know they can trust, so he wanted to take riches from both clans to get in. This is about as far as he told me at first. I had to press him a bit to get more information, but it was mostly broken up, and it was clear he was lying, so I drew my own conclusions. My best guess is that he couldn't just take the clan's riches on both sides, pay the fees and fuck off, since he only had those two accounts and clan C wouldn't let him in if they knew what he had done, and they do good research on their players, so he thought, if I can break the alliance by telling players on A and B that the other clan is trying to betray them and fabricate some evidence with the accounts, I can make it so the two clans fight, one of them beats the other and takes all the riches, then I can take all the collective riches of both clans, give them to the other account, and get into clan C. So I did what any responsible human being would have done and threatened I'd still reveal his information. If he didn't give me a special item he gave it to me, made sure it was mine and he couldn't take it back, and then called him out on his bullshit. A colleague I know wrote an authentication code that trigger within local and external. If it wasn't authenticated yearly by him, the authentication isn't via the standard API, but a customized backdoor. He would remove these bugs if he's moving to new company, if he was treated fairly by the company. Else, all these programs would just mysteriously not work on random days, and random error code of something that isn't related would prompt the structure of the bug would also randomize strings of data, causing it to output wrong information. It happened in a telecom that I worked for previously, which thinks that instead of promoting the bosses only, staff will have to queue up yearly and painfully during a bad year. That particular year, the customer wasn't really happy about data loss. The engineers couldn't find where the exploit were. I'm the only one knowing about it because he told me I left a few months later after getting a higher paid work elsewhere. Do not screw up your staff promotion. Edit. Before everyone jumping to the wagon saying this is a fake story, hold your horses. First of all, this isn't a dev company, it is a telecom, therefore anything we do are in-house without all those version verification software like Jitherb kinda stuff, therefore you won't be having different version type. In this case, all telecom by right, source their services to vendor and see where they have their dev doing that, of what you guys were talking, but this specific telco is cheap enough to force staff to write some portion of the modular functions because they are not going to pay the vendor for it unless you work directly with the telecom. Otherwise, it's not as what you think that there is a version control etc. and hope everyone write their own ad hoc codes, scripts etc. Just that this company is cheapskate enough to force us to write our specific software to interrogate with other services and database pointed to. Also that each of us were writing our own codes for different functions of different services. It may be a simple tool to just query to DB, so that the backend doesn't need to do that work and the customer service can just click 1 plus 2 plus 3 to get a result. It could also be a reporting tool, because the cheapskate company felt that we can do a simple dashboard, so they don't have to pay $30K for that web GUI etc. So in the end, everyone doesn't really know what is going on with each other codes, therefore the illegal injection of trap